Hey everybody, Saul Marquez with the Outcomes Rocket. Welcome back. Today I have the privilege of hosting an amazing leader. Her name is Tracy Warren. Tracy, thanks for being back with us.
My pleasure, Saul. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, Tracy just has an incredible mission. We had her on the podcast 2.5 years ago, and a lot has happened. A lot of great things have happened. But let me give you a quick intro if you haven't had the pleasure of listening to that podcast. She is a co-founder and CEO of Astarte Medical. Tracy leverages her experience in entrepreneurship and nearly 2 decades as an early stage venture capital investor. Tracy previously co-founded Astarte Ventures, a venture firm focused exclusively on investing in companies with technologies to support women's and children's health and well-being. And the work that she's doing at Astarte Medical is focused on just it's the NICU population and the pediatric space. So I'm excited to have her back on the podcast today to talk about the updates at Astarte Medical and insights that they're up to specific to nutrition and these kids. So Tracy, thanks for joining us again. And what's been up? How you been?
Busy.
Yeah.
Never a shortage of surprises, whether it be in the market or, just the broader environment. But we've been very fortunate, I think, to have, really good, strong relationships with our customers. We sell to hospitals, so we've endured COVID, come out of that with some good traction, and are really starting to demonstrate impact on patients and outcomes, which is really the reason we got into the business in the first place. So that's probably been our greatest badge of honor of late.
Last time we talked, you helped us understand precision nutrition and really the first 1,000 days in the NICU. But for those that haven't had that chance to understand it, why don't you help us understand the context of the space and sort of the importance of the work you guys do?
This has been a great learning journey for me as well. But really, what we focus on is the idea that between conception and age 2, you have a really unique window to use nutrition to set the foundations for long-term health outcomes. So while your gut microbiome and your early development of your brain and your physical growth is all at a rapid pace, you really do have an opportunity when people are hyper-focused on nutrition, right? Babies and making sure they eat and what they eat is usually a hyper-focus. We believe there's an opportunity to provide tools, digital tools, to support all of that information and to provide a better foundation initially for clinicians, ultimately for families and consumers on that early life nutrition to address some of the chronic conditions that face our kids today.
Yeah, it's a very important time, and I learned a lot during our last podcast with you, and so right now there's opportunities that you're getting after, and I want to help share those with the audience because they're very interesting. Before we do though, tell us why did you decide on this space? What is it about it that inspires you to fight the battle to make the difference?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I started my career in venture capital and really do love kind of that early stage opportunity. And we were investing in women and infant health when I met my scientific co-founder, Kate Gregory, and she's a NICU nurse by training. She was at the time at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. She was also a microbiome researcher. It was pretty unique to have a nurse innovator who is also, deep in the science field. And it was really her vision that there's so much data out there about, in this case, preterm infants, but in general around hospitalized pediatric patients. And we couldn't leverage it. It was documented, the EMR was keeping it, but there really wasn't a way to help inform clinical care. And it was really at the advent of big data. People were starting to talk about machine learning. Now it's obviously the topic of everyone's conversation. But we sort of had this view that software could solve a lot of these problems for clinical teams and help make this easier. And this being nutrition and what to feed and how to feed and when to fortify calories and help these kids really develop. So it was her vision that really catalyzed me to say, this is something that can be done And we wanted to be the people that got to make a difference in the lives of these families.
So what are the biggest gaps that your solution, your platform is addressing in the market today?
Well, I think one of the things most people may not realize is, medical school doesn't spend a lot of time on nutrition. And so clinical teams are usually relying on a registered dietitian or
Hmm.
nutritionist to help with care. And that's in the adult population as well. But especially for our pediatric patients, there's a heavy burden once kids are stabilized and surviving to really help them be nourished to go home. And whether that's a preterm infant or maybe a cardiac patient, how to keep them healthy so that malnutrition doesn't play a role in negatively impacting their outcomes. So what we're here to do is really to help create clinical decision support is our first product.
Hmm.
And hospitals have feeding protocols. They have it for all patient populations, but particularly for our babies, the interesting thing is every unit is different. And welcome to healthcare.
Yep.
Even units in the same health system will have different feeding practices because they're largely consensus based. There tends to be a bit of character and personality in them. And so hospitals spend a lot of time developing these guidelines, but really don't know if they're being followed or what the impact on their patient outcomes are. And we help bridge that gap. So we take, the known outcomes and we take sort of the intent or the guidelines and we bridge them together through an EMR integrated solution that makes the workflow easier and tries to drive that standardization.
And has the data become more easily accessible since, a few years back?
No, we've gotten better at understanding how to access it. I do think
Okay.
some of the efforts around interoperability have started to at least open some doors.
Hmm.
You have people who are taking the letter of the law as opposed to the spirit of the law. So some systems are easier than others. I think the real challenge is that largely EMRs were built as database structures, right, that were configured. And so every institution has customized in some way, shape, or form. And so that last mile tends to be where we
Yeah.
really need to spend time with our customers on identifying those right data fields. The other thing is, reality is, data has errors or gaps or documentation challenges, and when you start to look at that data through a visualization and logic platform like we have, you start to realize that humans see it and they just sort of process it and work through it in their brain, but the system needs high quality data. And so as we move into the advent of machine learning and AI, the quality of data in addition to accessibility is really going to be the conversation, in my opinion.
We were having a conversation the other day with just, pre-auth. There's a gentleman that has a
Mhm.
pre-auth
Mhm.
company and they have an incredible system, but again, the biggest challenge is getting access to the data, and
Yep.
working with providers. And it sounds like providers have become more accustomed to just accepting that they're the ones that have to provide this data to you, if a difference is going to be made. It sounds like similar, right, with you and many other applications out there. So very interesting approach there. What would you say, Astarte does different or better than other solutions out there?
So I think one of the things we set out to do was to take on the toughest part of this, and that is granular EMR data. So if you're working in a healthcare setting, it's usually things like clinical notes, it's data that's in flow sheets. And honestly, since most EMR systems were built for billing, nutrition falls outside of that as a priority. So our area of focus is layered with the fact that many of these systems weren't built to support nutrition and feeding. And for our patients, that is the most critical form of medicine beyond just getting them stable. So we're really kind of working in I'll call it in the basement, where there's just a lot of junk that we're working through and a lot of kind of unique profiles within the hospitals to configure because depending on how long the EMR has been in place, systems have had to adapt and configure. And so we're undoing a lot of that to try to get back to being able to compare across units, across systems, and really bring together some of that data harmony. And so that's what we do. It's difficult. We've built some proprietary tools. We have a data harness. We have a pre-processor, things to kind of clean up some of those challenges that we can leverage now across other populations besides our preterm infants. But it's not for the faint of heart, but we definitely think the value in creating long-term insights for our customers is really in that nitty-gritty patient data, not in claims data or some of the higher end areas.
If you had to sort of call out big wins, like what has been some of the aha moments for your customers that have said, "Wow, so glad I'm working with you guys because of this." What are those? I'm just curious about those aha moments.
One of them is just looking at their own protocol compliance. So many centers have done efforts in clinical effectiveness. They've got protocols for everything from
Hmm.
sepsis to, ER triage to feeding and nutrition. And when they actually see their compliance and it's actually measured in a, automated way like we do, there is a moment of like 30 to 40% is like, wow, wait a minute. That's not what we intended. We don't ever expect 100, right? That would
Yeah.
not allow medicine to be practiced the way it should. But those numbers tend to be a stark realization. I think the other thing is this data quality that I referenced earlier. Often you find, and a very simple example is a growth chart. If you've had kids and they chart them on a growth chart, all of a sudden you have a spike where a baby grew, gained 1,000 grams in a day, which is clearly a typo. But until you see it on the screen and your baby kind of jumps up and above this chart, you don't think about it. And so I think just the feedback, and we really put a lot of burden on clinical teams to document in the EMR with the promise of this, this data will then create better healthcare. But we never gave them tools to give it back to them in a way that they could use. And that's really where I think the wins are for us, is showing them their own data and saying, is this what you intended? Is this what you thought was happening? And getting it out of sort of that siloed structure that many EMRs tend to be built as. So that's really been the win, is just the visualization
Yeah.
of their own data. And it's not a research study, it's their own real world data.
That's awesome, Tracy. And so then does this become available to them on a dashboard? Does it live within their EMR as an app? Like, can you kind of talk to us to
Yeah,
how they
sure.
use it? Yeah, just very curious
Yeah,
about that.
we're entirely EMR integrated. So we
Okay,
sit right
cool.
within an Epic or a Cerner system. We're a tab or a button. So they're
Nice.
already logged in. We use their own authentication from their institution. So it really think of it as a wrapper
Hmm.
for a lot of the EMR data. So we liberate it, we organize it, and we try to give it back to them in a way that saves them time, which is the one most critical thing that they can't get more of, and then really helps to create these insights where we overlay data that's often in different components
Hmm.
of the EMR that now tell more of a patient story. And we think that really helps for our babies who spend weeks and months in the NICU, and you may have multiple teams and multiple providers helping to keep that story consistent and create that, consistent view of that baby's journey.
That sounds really insightful, and it's rather than see the baby and say, okay, they're doing good. Yeah, we've logged this. You can actually start to see trends and progress, or maybe the opposite, and something needs to change and addressed. Is it graphs? Is it numbers? Like, is it visual? How does it
Mhm.
look? I'm a very visual
A
person.
little bit of everything. No, but in all seriousness, I think one of the big things is nutrition's a long game. So unlike a heart rate monitor, unlike your pulse ox and things that are real time, and you're looking for spikes that are happening, nutrition happens over weeks, right, and days. And so to have that longitudinal context, so we do a lot of graphs,
Mm,
whether they look, they really kind of gather different types of feeding. So that's the other thing, right? Babies and a lot of intensive care patients are fed parenterally, right, through an IV or enterally through a tube. But you've got to add both those up to figure out what's actually getting to that patient. And so there's a lot of assimilation of data that helps to tell that story. And that's where we tend to use graphics largely. But when we make recommendations, we use tables and other ways to look at your data that sort of help you benchmark. Am I hitting the milestones? Am I getting kids to oral feeds? Are they growing appropriately? And we make all that data exportable. So that's the other thing is we know folks want to do research. They want to
Totally.
report on their quality, right? Get their data to be more in their hands and in their control. And that's really what our tools are working to do.
Love it. Love it. Tracy, before we started talking, before we hit record, you were telling me about some exciting entrance into cardiac. Do you want to tell
Mhm.
us a little bit more about that? I was very curious about that.
Yeah, so we are a platform company, and our goal is really to make clinical nutrition accessible for centers that have 5 RDs, registered dietitians, or zero, right? We want to make sure this is an accessible platform. And with that, we're extending beyond the neonatal intensive care unit. And so we're looking at pediatric patients initially still in the cardiac ICU. We hope to move into the GI surgical space, but really in those complex patients where nutrition has a dramatic impact on their recovery and or outcomes. How can we support that through that same platform?
Hmm.
So leveraging the same infrastructure we use, we call it our Nutrition IQ platform. How can we serve more patients initially within the pediatric setting, but obviously more broadly long term?
Interesting, Tracy. So you're getting beyond nutrition now. This is sort of using the same dashboard, getting data and aggregating it so that clinicians have unsiloed information to make decisions.
Yes, and in the cardiac in particular, we are looking at pre and post op nutrition, but that's where a lot of other settings beyond just feeding come into play, right? The
Hmm.
stability of the baby, lab results, things like that. So we are expanding our reach into what goes into these considerations and adding that layer of complexity that these kids really have to be managed for, especially before a major surgery like that.
Amazing. Wow, thank you so much. Super insightful. What calls to action would you leave to the listeners today as they think about their feeding program, their nutrition program, and ways to improve the health of these babies?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous data to support that standardization and being more focused. I think most hospitals understand that reducing practice variability improves outcomes in all areas of medicine. And feeding and nutrition is one of the most modifiable risk factors we have when it comes to healthcare. And so from the call to action for me is why not take sort of the low hanging fruit and really harness it. We can help with centers who are struggling to recruit, who may have shortages because technology is infinitely scalable. So I think folks always think about hiring more people in healthcare. We really need to change that dialogue to think about technology and how to support and make the clinical teams be able to work smarter and not work harder.
Tracy, really appreciate it. I'm excited for the work you guys are doing, the growth you guys have had, and for everybody listening. This is an opportunity to think about your nutrition program and or your customer's nutrition program and ways that you could make a difference. I always say, don't stop at listening. If something today resonated with you, take action. That's how you get on the rocket and blast off your outcomes. Tracy, you're amazing. I'm so glad you took action and or came back on the podcast today to tell us about what you guys are up to. So really, really appreciate you joining us again.
Well, thanks for having me, Saul. It's great to be here.